I'm nervous, okay?
Don't be nervous. Is it recording?
Yeah,
It's recording. Yeah. Okay, so it's fine. You're listening to Taking on Putin, episode 7, Kyiv, the best of times, the worst of times. Now, I'm recording the introduction to this week's show from a hotel room in Lviv because I'm leaving Ukraine for the first time since I flew in on Valentine's Day, before Russia invaded. I'll be back in Kyiv soon, but after nearly 3 months reporting Vladimir Putin's war, I wanted to share with you my reflections on the experience, on what I've heard and what I've seen. Now, this is the first war I've covered as a reporter on my own, without a big news organisation behind me. I used to work for the BBC, before that the Observer, and you could kind of plug into their machinery. This time I arrived with nothing, no kit, no flak jacket, no helmet, no fixer, and so I built up a team on the ground. First Vlad the driver, then Eugene, the world's worst fixer. I'm joking, he was very, very good. And then I bumped into Liza. She's been my producer, my translator, my fixer, so I could really tell the story of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine through Ukrainian eyes. And a bloody brilliant one she is too. But she's not always been a journalist. Just a few weeks before the war, she wasn't a journalist at all. She was a chemist and a pharmaceutical clinical researcher. How life changes. So this week's episode is slightly different because Liza wanted to interview me.
My name is Liza Kozlenko. I'm a Ukrainian chemist and clinical research associate. After the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine began, I joined the Territorial Defense Forces and later Ukrainian Volunteer Army as a press officer. So I became a journalist without any particular education or journalistic degree. My guest today is very fair and fearless John Sweeney. John arrived to Kyiv 10 days before the full-scale Russian invasion to Ukraine started. Why did you make such a decision to come here to Ukraine? The war has not started yet. There were rumors about the war. What was your motivation to come and to stay?
I have been reporting on Vladimir Putin's war crimes since I first went to Chechnya undercover twice. I went in 2000. And I saw terrible things that the Russian army had did, and Vladimir Putin had sent them there. And this felt like the final chapter, perhaps, of the story of Putin's crimes, and it would be wrong for me not to be here. I did not think that Vladimir Putin would actually do big war, i.e. the big invasion of Ukraine. I didn't think he would do it. And I was wrong about that.
You've been to more than 13 different wars and riots. And can you tell me, please, how does this particular war in Ukraine, the full-scale invasion, distinguishes from all the rest of the wars you've seen?
I used to be a war reporter millions of years ago, so I've kind of forgotten a lot of the stuff that goes on in war. But number one is there is always something very, very surreal about war. It is mad for a country like Russia to invade a country like Ukraine for no good reason in the 21st century. And one would have thought that in Europe that this wouldn't happen. An invasion of one big country against another hasn't happened like this since Adolf Hitler. So all of the other wars I've covered were, in a sense, smaller and less historic than this one, because this is a moment when the post-1945 settlement was broken.
Since we work together, many people in Kyiv ask me why you're always wearing your orange hat, because it's too bright. Many people think that you can be the good target for a Russian sniper or whoever it is shooting.
There's no significance to it at all. It's the last woolly hat in the ski shop. But I put it on my head. And I can remember my ex-wife saying, for God's sake, get rid of that hat. All the Russian snipers would kill you. And I said, no, it's not like that, because actually there are no Russian soldiers in the center of Kyiv. The problem for me is that there are the Ukrainian army checkpoints. And they were, certainly in the very early days of the war, paranoid about Russian spies. And I have to say, In the early days of the war, there was a bar called the Buena Vista, and it was the only bar that was open, and all journalists are famously thirsty, and also after a terrible day of bad stuff happening to you, you need a drink, you need to wind down, and we're a very, very sociable profession. So I'd go to the bar, and then I'd have to get back to my place through all these Ukrainian army checkpoints. And I realized that the smartest way of doing this was make myself extremely visible and very obviously a British journalist. And I would do two things. One, I'd wear the hat, which is almost day-glow. And I would say in a very loud voice, I would talk in English, hello, good evening, terribly sorry. So after a very short couple of days, the checkpoints recognized me in my hat, and it kept on saving my life. I was arrested for being a Russian spy. I was walking along, it was day 2 of the war, and I haven't got a big newspaper that's funding me to be here, so I have no flak jacket, no helmet. If I'm injured, I have no easy means of getting back on my own, so I've got to be careful. And I hit upon a way of funding myself to be here, which is Patreon. My patrons pay me to do something, and what I'm doing is reporting the war from Ukraine, and every day I do a little film on Twitter, 2 minutes, 20 seconds, Kyiv Diary. So I'm filming everything all the time. And it's silly because it means I've become tunnel vision on filming and not realizing what's happening. And what's happening is on day 2, Kyiv's under attack. There are Russian spies and Russian soldiers in plain clothes in Kyiv out to assassinate President Zelensky. There is a real plot. And there are Russian paratroopers 10, 15 miles from the center of Kyiv. I am walking along by the river underneath the fraternal arch, which is a symbol of friendship between the Russian and Ukrainian people, no irony there. And I film some Ukrainian soldiers because I'm filming everything all the time. And one of them, shut up, stop filming. Yeah. And then I move 100 yards and carry on filming. One of the soldiers sees me, I think, twice, realizes that I've been carrying on filming and stops me. So stop filming. And, you're Russian. Do I look like a Russian spy? So I'm wearing my orange hat. I'm wearing my brown duffel coat. So I just said to this guy, do I look like a Russian spy? So I've got one piece of advice to give, which is never have an argument with a man with a loaded machine gun.
True.
Anyway, he did this, took my phone, took my passport, took my British press pass, and I sort of do this, and we end up in a kind of pumping station. And then the door closes, and I realise, this is the end of me, But the guy who's arrested me speaks very good English, and he's civil, and he said, listen, we're going to check you out. If there's no problem, there's no problem. Just look at my Twitter. And I keep on saying, and he doesn't look at my Twitter. They call the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence, and then a nice lady appears, like a grandma, gives me a cup of tea, and I think, well, I'm not being tortured here. It's a nice cup of tea.
Not yet.
And then Vlad is, actually, I'm a filmmaker, says Vlad. You're a filmmaker? And my name's Vlad Demchenko, and actually I've got the premiere of my film about the Donetsk airport, the Battle of the Donetsk airport, which I know something about because I've been to Donetsk back in the day, both before the war and during the war when it started in 2014. But it's been cancelled because of the war. And I said, that's bad luck. And then he starts looking me up on Google.
Finally.
And finally, he looks me up and he says, you've doorstepped Putin. Yes, I've doorstepped Putin. It's a picture of my Twitter banner, at John Sweeney.
It's not Photoshop.
It's not like, it's actually, there is me challenging Vladimir Putin about the shooting down of MH17 on my Twitter feed. I am not a Russian spy. Then he sees, I've actually interviewed Donald Trump, and Donald Trump walks out on me. And he said, are you famous? And I said, well, I am a bit, yeah. I'm not a Russian spy. And then he says, it's a good story for you. Yeah. Anyway, remember this is day 2 of the war. And we drive to the SBU. And when we get to the SBU headquarters, the SBU are not completely convinced that these people who have arrived in a big military jeep are who they say they are. And then Vlad turns to me and he said, I think they're being a bit paranoid. And I want to go, welcome to my world, but I'm being meek and mild. This is hard for me because you've already worked out that I'm an arrogant plonker. But anyway, we all sit there and eventually 3 soldiers come and take me from where we've stopped to another entrance. And when we get to the other entrance, the 3 soldiers are also suspected of being Russian spies with me. I'm still wearing my lucky orange hat. And again, it's incredibly tense. Remember that the SBU headquarters is the number 2 target after Zelensky, after the president. And I'm just thinking, John, this isn't great luck here. But anyway, so eventually I'm led in and there's an intelligence officer who goes through my phone and sees the pictures of me taking pictures of the Ukrainian soldiers. I'm actually taking pictures of everything with some Ukrainian soldiers in the background.
It still looks like you have been spying.
Not really. And anyway, I said, listen, I'm very sorry. I apologize for my mistake. I'm happy to delete these pictures. And I was free to go. The commander who'd driven me was in the car and I knocked on the window and gave him a thumbs up to say, I'm still alive. There's a postscript to this, in that later on an operation against the Russian army, both the commander and the deputy commander in that vehicle were found by the Russian army and they were killed and that vehicle was destroyed. So of the 4 of us, only Vlad and I are still alive.
I'm so sorry to hear this.
Yes. So this is war, right? Anyway, that is part of the story of the Lucky Orange Hat. What I'm doing is I wanted to think of some clever way of generating some money to help Ukrainian charities. And so with Crowdfunder, I've organized a crowdfunding to win my lucky hat in a prize draw, and all the money goes to help Ukrainian charities. And so far, it's raised something like £12,000.
Wow, great.
So
can people still buy
they can buy a ticket? The prize draw is going to happen on something like May the 18th or May the 19th. So, yes, you've still got time.
Good, great. So the hat eventually was lucky for both of you, for you and for Vlad.
For me, for Vlad also, there's an extra thing is I went to Kyiv Zoo and I met the elephant, and the elephant tried to eat it. I thought it was some kind of orange or something like that.
The elephant wanted to be lucky, probably.
Yeah,
too.
and so I've got elephant goo from the trunk on the hat as well.
And it's super cool to have it, to win it eventually. Speaking of the flak jackets and other means of protection during the war, some very good people provided you with the flak jacket, right? The plates to put inside, and also the respirator to protect you from the chemical weapon. Why you have never ever used it?
So what happened was I did not think there'd be a war, and therefore I thought it was foolish to buy kit for a war you didn't need. Then obviously big war came to Kyiv, and I needed a flak jacket and a helmet where it was impossible to get hold of one. And eventually people in the Ukrainian defense system, they got me a helmet and a flak jacket, which was wonderful, but the flak jacket had no panels. And it's pretty useless without. So I had a flak jacket, but with no plates. And then what happened was that Johnny Mercer, who is somebody I'd never met before, he's a Conservative MP, and he was the first British politician, one of the very, very first politicians to come to Kyiv. And he had a flak jacket with plates. And he gave me his flak jacket, or loaned it, and I could put his plates in my big Ukrainian flak jacket, and then suddenly I had the whole thing. The thing is that it's heavy and I'm lazy, and I don't like carrying the plates because they're bad on my knees. I think I wore the flak jacket with the plates once near Brovary, where you could hear artillery loud, and when it's loud and you can hear it, you can feel it through your feet. That's incoming. Outgoing, boom. Incoming, boom, boom, 2 explosions, the explosion of the shell coming at you, and then the explosion, the second explosion when it lands, and you can feel it through your feet. Incoming is never good. And I wore it once to there,
That
but
was the
rest-
only moment you got scared.
Yeah, and
let's
then
say
the
so.
other thing is I had a helmet which I carried with me because it looked sexy. But
True.
I always wore my orange hat because it struck me as
It's better
more,
than helmet for
it's
sure.
more important to tell the Ukrainian army that you're not a Russian spy than it is to wear a helmet.
Agree.
And that was my kit. At some point, Liza, actually, you gave me a gas mask, a gas breathing mask, but with nothing for the eyes.
I'm sorry, whatever I had in my home.
But it was, for which I'm very grateful. But
It's
thank
from the
God,
chemical lab with the high level of protection. It's
thank
an
God we
American
haven't been
one.
gassed.
Well, whatever I had, I sacrificed for the favorite journalist. Anyways, the main reason you're too lazy to wear any of it, and you just don't care.
I used to wear the flak jacket.
Let's move to some serious stuff, which would be, I know that you're a humane and very decent person, and you're not in favor of killing. And I accept it and respect it very much. But we have a law in Ukraine during our martial law, during the period when we have martial law. All Ukrainians, both militaries and civilians, are allowed legally to kill Russian soldiers. As well, the foreigners who are staying on the territory of Ukraine legally are allowed to do the same. And I was just thinking, we went together to Bucha, Irpin, and Borodyanka, and I was just thinking about all the women from the villages and small towns around Kyiv region. Can you imagine one of such women? Imagine the Russian soldiers visited her family. First thing they usually do, they killed her husband, they raped her, and they made the little kid watch. Do you think it's justifiable for her to kill the Russian soldiers if she manages afterwards?
Yes.
This is the first part of the question, and that will be the second part.
Yes.
It's justifiable. Okay, speaking of you, what do you need to eyewitness in Ukraine to have a feeling that you want to kill a Russian soldier? Or there is no such thing that would make you feel this way, never ever?
Difficult question. This isn't the first time I've seen the Russian army behave against the rules of war, to behave without humanity. The first time I saw was a hospital in Chechnya in 2000, and there was a little girl. She was 8, and there was a family of 7, and they were Chechens, all civilians, in a big black Volga with a white flag on it, part of a refugee convoy. And the Russians gave them a safe passage, and then the Russians betrayed that safe passage, and they bombed the convoy. And every single person in the car, apart from this little girl who was 8, was killed. A mother, a father, her brothers and sisters, and a cousin. 6 were killed. She survived. And I interviewed her for The Observer in a Channel 4 film I made called Dying for the President in 2000. And what's so terrible is this is happening again. So I believe very much in the rules of war that, for example, the Geneva Convention towards Russian soldiers should be respected and honoured. The problem is the Russian army have not respected or honoured the Geneva Convention. And what I saw with my own eyes in Borodyanka and Bucha in particular, was terrible. There were 2 men who were both civilians who were on Vokzalna Street, which is Station Street. Remember, this was a crucial battle in the battle for Kyiv. This was when the Russian army, on I think the 2nd or 3rd day, got a sense that the Ukrainians were going to fight, and fight very hard. And because the Russian army started taking losses in a big way, they then became vengeful, and they would find pretty much any civilian and shoot them. In war, most of the time, people are killed by shrapnel from artillery. So a shell or a mortar is fired from a distance, and the shell lands and kills lots of people. So you would expect in any war to have something like 9 out of 10 people killed by shrapnel, by artillery, and then 1 out of 10 killed by a bullet. Those would be the kind of numbers you would expect from former Yugoslavia, from the war in Croatia, the war in Bosnia. In Bucha, something like 7 out of 10 were shot. And these two civilians that we found, one man had been shot in the back of the head. We don't know his name. We haven't been able to identify him yet. The other man had been shot in the front of his head. These are both crimes against humanity. They're war crimes. There is no reason why a soldier should shoot an unarmed civilian. To shoot somebody in the face, as this man. His name is Alexander Fedorov. Liza found through a bit of good journalism, she found out his identity. And there's an issue here in that normally the families, there's enough family members who are able to identify the dead. But there was nobody who could identify these two men, and so there was a mystery. And the answer to the mystery was that they were actually, well, certainly the one we know about, Alex Fedorov, was a builder, not from Kyiv. And he was there working on a job building, and therefore he didn't have close family to look after him or to at least recognize him once he'd been killed. And the story was that he and the other man were hiding in a basement, and they ran out of water, desperate. They came above ground to get something to drink, and they were shot dead. And these are war crimes. Now, there are many, many instances of this. These are just two that I saw with my own eyes, and we took pictures of it. And we were there when the local people from Bucha wrapped these two men in body bags and took them so they would be taken off to the morgue. And the image of this man, the man with the hole in his face, is probably the most obscene thing I've ever seen. The face has been weathered because he was left to rot there for 2 or 3 weeks in the rain and the snow. Maybe the birds picked his eyes. I don't know. But the hole in his head, it's proof of a war crime.
Was it the most impressive or unexpected thing you've seen in Irpin, Bucha and Borodyanka altogether?
Borodyanka was a different kind of awfulness because you actually, you couldn't see the dead.
You can see the rubbles.
Essentially what had happened was the Russian Air Force had come along and put 2 missiles into a block of flats full of people. And you could tell that, it's a normal block of flats in the heart of Borodyanka, and there'll be old people who don't want to go to the shelter. There'll be sick people. There'll be people who are maybe a bit like me, too cussed to be bothered. So something like 30 or 40 people were killed. Again, 2014, the shooting down of MH17. I saw the crash site. 298 people were killed. I saw the bodies which are in body bags by this point, being loaded into a lorry, being taken off. And I saw that on the crash site amongst the engine oil, amongst the cornfield. This plane, MH17, shot down by a Russian boot missile, which had been loaned to the pro-Kremlin rebels in Donetsk. But this was a war crime. This was a crime against humanity. But the issue is, there are some German intellectuals who have written a letter saying, don't send the Ukrainians heavy weapons. And I disagree with that intensely, because you cannot negotiate or argument with people whose manners are shooting people in the face.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
It's true. Even though we tried in the beginning.
So my podcast, Taking on Putin, and the book I'm writing, Killer in the Kremlin, the two things are my attempt to understand what makes Vladimir Putin do the thing that he does. And I think he's a pitiless psychopath. And the only thing he understands is force, or the threat of force, seriously and effectively delivered. And the only way of stopping him is for the Ukrainian army to defeat him militarily, and for us to hope that somebody brave and good in Russia, inside the closed bubble of the Kremlin, stops him, by which I probably mean kills him. But I'm a reporter.
Yeah.
I'm not a killer.
It's true.
But at the same time, if I was there on Vokzalna Street and I had a weapon, a brick or whatever, I would have tried to stop the Russian soldier who killed Alexander Fedorov. I would have tried to do that.
Thank you very much. It's more than enough for me. Okay, let's move to something lighter, more cheerful, like Zelensky press conference, which we went together. You got to ask your question and you got your answer.
So Zelensky is a hero. He's a hero of our time. I know good Ukrainians who didn't vote for him. In fact, pretty much all of my Ukrainian friends didn't vote for him.
Me included.
But also I think his conduct of the war has been seriously good. Zelensky is open to challenge from reporters. By the way, the newspaper that gave me my accreditation with the Ukrainian military is the Jewish Chronicle. But anyway, I'm putting up my hand in the press conference to Zelensky, Jewish Chronicle. And obviously, in the great scheme of things, it's not BBC, it's CNN or the Americans or whatever, but eventually I get to ask my question, and it's a tricky one, which is, what does he think about the Russian opposition? People like Navalny, people who, or even the kids who go to the Moscow demonstrations and get beaten up by the Moscow police. What's his message to them? And he said, I'm grateful to them. I thank them. So I like Zelensky a lot. I think he's seriously good and brave. Number one, because he held a press conference. He's still a target for Russian missiles. He holds a press conference in the underground station, and it's seriously cool. You've got
the coolest one,
yeah,
as you
it's the
said.
coolest press conference I've ever been to. He answers our questions, and he answers them thoughtfully and properly, and he's good. True. And the other thing is he didn't leave. So very early on, he sends a message to the world. The Americans have offered him a ride. I don't want a ride. I want ammunition. We need ammunition.
Yeah.
So the very fact of him staying was like Churchill staying in London in 1940. Churchill never left. I mean, he's in a bunker, he's in a tube station or something like it. It doesn't matter. He stayed.
Yeah.
So did Zelensky.
True.
So this is a great moment because it means that he was defending democracy and the spirit of democracy really when it mattered. So he's a hero of our time.
He has made a series of very important and right decisions in the very beginning of the war. And this is something I'm proud of too.
Yes. When the war's over, it's back to normal service. We're here because democracy is beautiful and precious. Free speech is beautiful and precious. But free speech does not come free. And the moment the war is over, journalism will carry on in its proper way, asking serious questions of power, not just in Russia, but here also in Ukraine. But for the moment, it's right to say that what Zelensky did was brave and bold and good.
I agree. Thank you, John. And speaking of journalism, in the early days of the war, BBC offered me a job, the full-time job, but to do that, I had to quit my territorial defense services and to do what? And to become very impartial. The BBC made it very clear that in this conflict, not the war, we cannot say that we are 100% allied with the Ukraine. As a true journalist, we remain impartial and we will be documenting the war crimes of both sides, Russian and Ukrainian. That was totally against my values. I cannot be impartial at all. But since I'm maybe young and unexperienced journalist, do you think I made the right decision?
I'm not a Ukrainian nationalist, but I believe in democracy and I believe in the rule of law and I believe in free speech, but free speech must be fought for. It does not come free, and it must be defended. And what I'm not going out to kill anybody, but just simply the fact that I'm a witness here and a storyteller and a reporter means it became more difficult for the Russian army to commit war crimes in the way that they were doing. It didn't stop them.
They will not get away with it because we are shouting about their crimes every day.
And also that you can do that, but also if there's somebody like me with my history as a BBC reporter also telling these stories, I'm absolutely confident. I have never lied once while I've been in every single Twitter film I've made. I've made a couple of mistakes, which I've corrected. But the point is, in a war between democracy and dictatorship, we should all be on the side of democracy. But there'd been some great reporting by the BBC. I just felt that on that particular day, that particular manager misread you badly.
Your 13th book, Killer in the Kremlin, it's kind of obvious, but what is it about?
It's about Putin, about what makes him do the thing that he does. I've met him, it challenged him about the shooting down of MH17. I saw the first war crimes in Chechnya in 2000. I saw the casus belli, the Moscow apartment bombs. I believe that Vladimir Putin ordered the Moscow apartment bombs. He ordered the Russian secret police to blow up Russia and then blame it on the Chechens to give it a casus belli for the second Chechen war. I've met and interviewed a series of brave and brilliant Russian journalists and politicians who stood up to Putin. Anna Politkovskaya, Natasha Esmerova, Boris Nemtsov, Alexei Navalny, in order. Anna poisoned, then shot. Natasha shot. Boris Nemtsov shot. Alexei poisoned and now in jail. So part of my argument I have with my Ukrainian friends, and I understand where you're coming from, is, there are no good Russians. They're all as bad as Putin. I don't think that's true. There are good Russians.
Very few ones.
There's enough. The problem is they're either dead or not very alive.
True. Unfortunately. So do you think it's going to become a bestseller?
God, I don't know. It's I'm a storyteller. I've just spent the past month hammering away at this book, telling the stories I know about Putin, about the people I know who've challenged him, who've ended up dead or in jail, about the ordinary, extraordinary people I've seen. I find the act of writing very therapeutic.
I agree.
I find the act of writing, it helps me understand what I've been through, and it helps me explain things.
It's true.
And also, I want to write a novel, I want to write a thriller about my time here, because that will help me understand and deal with some of the stuff which is more inside my head. The jokes and the humor and the the love of life and the laughter I've experienced and enjoyed here has been a thing of beauty.
What's next? Are you going to be back in Ukraine?
I can't keep away from the place because it's fascinating. I'm going to come back through the summer and the autumn and the winter until Ukraine is safe.
Thank you very much for opening up, for being honest, sincere and funny, and for staying here, for your interest in our bleeding and wounded country, but still so beautiful. Thank you, John.
Good. Right, let's go drinking. You've been listening to Taking on Putin, Episode 7, Kyiv, the best of times, the worst of times. Listen out for our next episode, The View from the Spire. In 2018, the Kremlin's poison factory is about to crank out a brand new product. Here's a taster of what happens. So the two Russians came all the way to London, and then they came here to Salisbury because they said they wanted to see Salisbury Cathedral's spire. But silly GRU, silly Russian military intelligence, they didn't make it. Shame on them. Taking on Putin is a podcast series written and reported by me, John Sweeney, for Black Dog Woof Woof Productions. It's produced by Chalk and Blade in London and sound recording by Syndicate Productions in Kyiv. For Chalk and Blade, the executive producer is Laura Sheeter, with other production by the team. It's mixed and sound designed by Alex Port-Felix, with original music by Thomas Hewitt-Jones. Now, I've launched a crowdfunder to help fund this podcast, Taking on Putin. There are lots of costs, lawyers, checking things out, making sure that it gets to all the right platforms, making sure that the people that I'm working with and I am safe. from legal and other threats. I'm not going to spell them out, but you can use your imagination. So, if you can help me tell this story, please help me crowdfund it. In your search engine, dial in crowdfunder taking on Putin with me, John Sweeney. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming along for the ride. Take care, and love from Lviv.